Yeah, where to even begin. So I wanted to, did any of you guys check out that video I posted about Douglas and slavery and all that stuff? It was like a 30-minute long lecture that I made last year.
I think I watched like half of it.
About half of it.
I watched it. Yeah.
Did you?
Yeah, this thing's really handy while I'm working.
What's that, Danny?
I say while I'm working, I said those videos are real helpful as I work.
Right. Yeah. All those types of videos I've given you in the class, I think is good, like background noise. It's like if you're doing something else, you can listen to my soothing voice. Right, so if you're doing the dishes or something, turn on one of those videos. It's good background noise. But there's not a lot of engagement in them. It's mostly just me talking. So it's good for them.
Your voice is a lot better than the sound of a lawnmower. So.
Right. Yeah, so I wanted to talk about just a couple of things about that since we didn't get to cover it last week. In the video, I'm not going to go into too much detail because I do all that in that video. But the Douglas narrative is one of the most important texts of all of American literature. As I mentioned in the video, like it was part of this abolitionist movement that started up, and people like Ralph Waldo Emerson and Henry David Thoreau were part of that. The Transcendentalists were part of that abolitionist movement, to end slavery. There's all kinds of other movements going on too at the time. I think I told you guys it's also the age of reform. So this was the time when women's right to vote. This is when that was being called in. That's when that movement started. There was a movement to end drinking, the temperance movement, which eventually won out by the 1920s. Right? Prohibition was a thing for a little while. There was a movement to end the death penalty, which that's still going on, right? So there was all kinds of like movements in this time period. Slavery was the big one. Let me do this really quick. Let me actually Google something really quick and show it to you. One thing that regarding slavery, one thing that you guys might sometimes hear is that some people say slavery was not the main cause of the Civil War. So you guys might have even heard that in a history class. Just to speak frankly, anybody who tells you that is a moron. Okay. Slavery was the main cause of the Civil War. This was the hot issue of the day, right? And for good reason. I mentioned in that video that so much of the United States economy in the 1800s was based off the slave trade. So like King Cotton, right? Cotton, most of the world's cotton came from the United States and they exported it over to England and all the rest of Europe. So much of even our economy came from those southern states. Tobacco, of course, too. Mostly Virginia was tobacco country, but like all the other southern states, most of those had these really big plantations with King Cotton. And this, of course, what ended up happening in the South, the Jeffersonian vision of America started to fail. You really didn't see a lot of these big farmers or small farmers. You had these big farmers spring up. What did they do? They exploited the slave class. Right? They became really rich, off of the labor of African slaves. And one thing to make clear too, I don't know if we covered this when we talked about Ben Franklin and stuff, but when the Constitution was founded, the slave trade was actually banned. So like you could no longer import slaves over from Africa anymore when the Constitution came about. So what did they end up doing? Well, they had to breed the slaves, right? So in order to continue the institution of slavery, you had to make more slaves. And they continually also expanded the definitions of who is a slave. So there was people who looked as white as me, right? Who were slaves, because they even came up with this rule, like if your genealogy if you have 1/16 African blood in you, right, you could be a slave. So they made up rules like that. I've traced the whole process in that video, but over the decades leading to the Civil War, it just kept getting more and more of a hot button issue. The United States was expanding west. So as it expanded west, you ran into the problem of, as we admit new states, we have to keep the power between North and South equal. So if we have more Southern states that allow slavery in the Northern states, well, they're going to outvote the North and everything in the Senate, right? So as we kept expanding westward, every time a new Southern state came about that allowed slavery, you had to also admit a new Northern state. So Missouri, for instance, like the Missouri Compromise of 1820, when Missouri became a state, they also made Maine a state. So lots of history involved there. But in 1850, the Compromise of 1850 is when everything really started going to hell, right? In the Compromise of 1850, the South got the ability to actually go north, and these slaveholders were able to reclaim their slaves who might have ran away. So Douglas, of course, in that narrative was a runaway slave. He part of close to the end of it was when he actually did run away. He says, "I'm not even going to tell you how I did it, because they can use that as a weapon against my fellow slaves who are trying to run away." But they didn't need proof. They didn't even need proof saying, "Hey, this is my slave or not." Just a random guy could go up to like Boston and be like, "Hey, that's my slave," and then they would be chained up and have to be taken back south again. That started a lot of riots and whatnot. Like I said, so a lot of these presidents leading up to Abraham Lincoln, they were very apathetic. They didn't want to do anything about it. They knew that they did, that it would be a problem. Even Abraham Lincoln, when he first became president, really didn't want to do anything about it necessarily. When the Civil War started, he just wanted to stop the rebellion. When Lincoln first became president, his idea of how to handle slavery was actually just to send all the slaves back to Africa. So anybody who was black, round them up, put them on a boat, and send them back to Africa. That was his idea.
That's probably easier than a civil war. It's easier.
Right. Yeah. I mean, that was his idea. And imagine how much different America would be today if that would have happened. But as the war progressed, he slowly came around and issued like the Emancipation Proclamation, freeing the slaves by executive authority. That didn't mean anything. That was just him saying, "By my power as president, I'm freeing the slaves." That didn't hold any weight. He had to have Congress do it. And of course, that's what we just celebrated like last week in the country, right? The day that the slaves were freed by the government. There was lots of maneuvering and political posturing and all that, bribes given and all that to finally pass that. So I just wanted to make that clear, though. Anybody who tells you that slavery was not the main cause of the Civil War is a moron. Right?
I've never heard that. I thought that was as common. Yeah. Can't believe people believe that.
Well, I'm going without giving you evidence for the claim. Okay, let's look. Let me just quickly give you this historical document. This is South Carolina's document, saying that here's why we're leaving the United States. This is their secession document saying here's why we're leaving the United States. Give you the exact part here. Let's see. Basically, what these documents tell you, I'll actually give you the link in the chat so that you can read over it yourself in the next few minutes. You actually do that really quick. What these documents will tell you is that, yes, a part of why the Civil War was caused, part of why these southern states were leaving was because of states' rights. And from the very onset of America, there was the issue of states' rights versus federal power. I told you guys before, Alexander Hamilton wanted a strong federal government. Thomas Jefferson wanted a government where the federal government didn't hold a lot of power, but the state governments did. So oftentimes people will tell you that the cause of the Civil War was states' rights. Well, like in this South Carolina document, they say, yeah, it's states' rights, but they say that the federal government is impinging on the states' rights to choose whether they're going to allow slavery or not. And he says, yeah, it was states' rights, but it was about the states' rights to own slaves. It says here, on the 4th day of March next, this party will take possession of the government, meaning the Republican Party at the time. It is announced that the South shall be excluded from the common territory, that the judicial tribunal shall be made sectional, and that a war must be waged against slavery until it shall cease throughout the United States. The guarantees of the Constitution will then no longer exist. The equal rights of the states will be lost. The slave-holding states will no longer have the power of self-government or self-protection, and the federal government will have become their enemy. Sectional interest and animosity will deepen the irritation, and all hopes of remedy is rendered vain by the fact that public opinion at the North has invested a great political error with the sanction of more erroneous religious belief. We, therefore, the people of South Carolina, by our delegates and convention assembled, appealing to the supreme judge of the world for the rectitude of our intentions, have solemnly declared that the union hereto existing between this state and the other states is dissolved. That the state of South Carolina has resumed her position among the nations of the world as a separate and independent state with full power to levy war, conclude peace, contract alliances, establish commerce, to do all other acts and things which independent states may of right do. This is from Christmas Eve, 1860. And it plainly says right there, the reason why South Carolina left the Union was because of slavery. Right? It plainly states that. That's not me making a political statement. It plainly states that. So I always, whenever I teach this class, I always have to do that little soapbox rant. Because it's not just people who work for the school. You might have heard that in high school and stuff too. That's a very common misconception that people will give you. So I just wanted to make that clear. I don't know. You guys have any thoughts on that, or have you heard anything different?
No, I went to school at Hearts, and that's what we were taught.
That's what you were taught?
Yeah, that's what I've always known. I might have had other classes, but I guess sometimes it pays off not to fully pay attention.
Right. Yeah, that's see a lot of why that view has come about is because after the Civil War, there was a bunch of Southern historians who came together and tried to make the South look a lot better than it was. Right? Those historians are called the Lost Cause historians. The Lost Cause historians. You know, they paint the South like these are people who love their state. They're fighting for their state. Like Robert E. Lee, for instance. Right? Robert E. Lee's interest was for Virginia. He was a patriot of Virginia. Right? So he is fighting for his people in Virginia. He's a hero. Right? Lots of stuff like that. So that's where a lot of these things that came up with Southern memorials. So like you might over the past couple of years, there's been a lot of controversy over like monuments of people like Robert E. Lee or Stonewall Jackson. Well, a lot of why that's controversial is because these historians who tried to paint the South in a romantic light, you know, that's when all these statues and memorials came about. They were honorable men, right? They were fighting for their homeland. That's BS, right? That's BS. They were fighting for the right to own slaves. No, I'm not making that claim about every Southern soldier. There was lots of Southern soldiers who went to war, and they were poor as dirt. Right? They weren't soldiers. They weren't people who owned plantations. A lot of these people were actually pretty poor. They went to fight for the South just because they lived there. Right? There was a lot of people like that, but the people who were in charge of leading the war, no, that was not their intention. They wanted to preserve slaves, the institution of slavery. Like I said, I'm not making that claim about every Southern person in the war, but like for the most part, the people who led the war, they wanted slavery. The Douglas document that we read last week is, like I said, it's a key piece of literature. You know, one of the great moment in that document is when he goes to Mr. Covey. Right, when he meets Mr. Covey. That whole incident. So you guys kind of have to think to yourself, the power dynamics between masters and slaves, very uneven. Right? Part of the genius of that document is Douglas even investigating the power dynamics between the two. You know, once Douglas fought Covey, who was supposed to be this great breaker of unruly slaves, once he fought him, Covey lost all of his power in that dynamic. Right? So Douglas kind of exposes how this institution can fall apart at any given moment, like with a strong enough rebellion. Great moment. That's one of the biggest moments of American literature is when Douglas writes about how he broke Covey in that section of the narrative. The narrative did all kinds of other stuff too. Right? It exposed the power of literacy. Right? Some of you guys wrote about that on your discussion posts. You know, like part of how slave owners kept their slaves in the dark was just not ever teaching them to read. If you teach them to read, then that's going to give them ideas. Right? They might be able to pick up a paper from one of these abolitionists, right, saying, "Hey, it's against God's will to even have slaves." But God, there's so much to talk about with this subject. Like I could spend the whole 2 hours on it if I wanted to. Right? Slave owners would use the Bible. right, to justify why they should have slaves, right? They would say that that Africans were black because they had the mark of Cain, for instance, right? The being black is the mark of Cain, and they would say that. They would also say too that you guys know the Noah's Ark story, like right after Noah's Ark, like there was I think it was Noah's son Ham, I think it was, but like there was this whole like shameful thing where Noah, I think I forget the story. Somebody who might know that story might enlighten us here, but they used that to justify slavery too. You know what
That
I'm
I'm not for sure of. I do know that Moses was married to an Ethiopian woman.
You know, there's a moment in Genesis where Noah.
Ham, that's right. That's the right name. And I don't know. I do remember that name, but I don't remember why Ham is exactly cursed.
Right. Yeah, there's that moment in like Noah sleeps with Ham's wife or something like that when he's drunk or something. I think that's the story. And God puts a curse on them for that. So they used that. They used anything they could think of to justify slavery. That's pretty much where I'm going with this.
But I'm pretty sure the thing of that is when Noah was drunk. I think that was after the flood and
It
all
was.
that.
Yeah, it was.
Because that's the reason why he couldn't enter into the promised land was because he was drunk before his family or something like that. But I did not know that they used that for like slavery. That's wild.
Right. They used almost anything they could think of to justify why we should have slaves. And the southern states also called out the northern states for being hypocrites. They said, okay, we have slaves, but up north, you guys have all these factories where you pay people like a penny an hour or something, right? Right. So what's worse, our slaves or your slaves? Right. People who you don't even pay enough to make a living wage. Right. They're your slaves. They say the only difference between us and them is your slaves have the right to vote. Right. So there are all kinds of interesting dialogue and discourse going on about slavery. And now that we're actually trending towards talking about fiction in the class, right, you guys can actually start to see some of these social issues that might come up in fiction. Right? Poe, especially Poe's fiction, there's lots of social issues that come up. All kinds of stuff we've been talking about in the course: slavery, Puritans, Puritans especially next week. Like all this stuff's actually going to start to become part of the fiction that we're reading too.
It was in Sleepy Hollow. I think with Ichabod. I think he said he was a follower of Cotton Mather.
Right. Yeah, that's part of Ichabod's character, right? That he reads a lot of Cotton Mather. He's very superstitious as a result. So any thoughts about any of this stuff? Questions, comments, concerns before we move on to talking about like Poe?
No, I liked it. I really liked the progression with Emerson and Thoreau to Douglas. I thought.
Yeah, wasn't it you, Danny? Wasn't it you who wrote about how Douglas embodies self-reliance and all that? I think I read.
Yeah, I enjoyed all that. Emerson and Thoreau and Douglas and how kind of Emerson walked the walk and then Thoreau kind of did his experiment and then Douglas really walked the walk.
Right. He did all that without even knowing that he did it. Right. So
Yeah.
that's part of the genius of that text too, right?
Yeah, where Thoreau, he, was inspired by Emerson, I guess. Douglas didn't have, that type of inspiration of what a transcendentalist should be.
Yeah, so Douglas, a key figure. Like he lived he lived through the Civil War. Like Lincoln and actually like relied a lot on his like counsel and stuff on how to handle the end of slavery. Very important figure. Douglas
Yeah,
was.
he was.
Or go ahead, Danny.
I was talking about how he even like stood up for women. I think one of the women in there, I think he said like he didn't, there was something going on, or he said he didn't want this unless women were granted their freedom as well, or something along the lines of that. Yeah, like he stood up for everybody, that's for sure.
Yeah, there's all kinds of these slave narratives that popped up. Douglas is the most famous, but slave narratives were actually a big genre of literature that sprang up at this time. All kinds of these runaway slaves wrote about their experiences and living in the South and whatnot. We're not reading it in this class, but actually the fictionalized version of a story like this was Uncle Tom's Cabin, a little book called Uncle Tom's Cabin. You get excerpts from it in our textbook. It's too long to teach in class like this. That's why I don't teach it. If I was teaching this class to English majors, I would make them read the whole thing. But yeah, Uncle Tom's Cabin was a big hit. Lincoln actually called it the little book that started the war, right? Just because it painted the institution of slavery as being so awful and whatnot. Of course, you guys might know the term too, Uncle Tom. Uncle Tom was a character in the book who he just kind of like resigns himself to fate, right? He's very sympathetic towards his masters and whatnot in it. So like anytime now that you might see like a black person who like votes against the interests of other black people, right? They'll oftentimes call that person an Uncle Tom today. That's meant to disparage them, right? And so if you guys have ever heard that term Uncle Tom, that's where that comes from.
I think I've heard some people use that and not know what.
Right.
Probably. Yeah, I didn't know that either. I didn't know where that came from.
Yeah, that's meant to insult a black person by saying that they're not with other black people. Oftentimes African American people will use that to criticize people who vote against their interests.
Now this started after Douglas. Like the Douglas just pretty much it was just like a chain reaction after that, like where he was teaching other slaves to read and things like that.
What are you talking about? Uncle Tom's Cabin?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean that book. I think that book and Douglas might have come out around the same time, actually. So saying that one influenced the other, I wouldn't make that claim because I think both came out around that same time, early 1850s. But you can't take a class in American literature before the war without reading Douglas. So I know that we were supposed to talk about it last week. You guys did a great job talking about it on the discussion boards, but wanted to give a few minutes at least to knocking that one down. So let's move on now to talking about fiction and Poe and maybe Irving here. We might bring some Irving up today. So I think I told you guys before, around 1820, this is when a lot of like literary production started. So there was like a lot of novels right around the end of the Revolution period up through the 1820s. But you don't read a lot of stuff like that in this class now because a lot of it's just simply wasn't very memorable. You have to be kind of like a really hardcore American lit nerd to read a lot of those like novels around that time period, because a lot of them don't hold up necessarily. But in the 1820s, they oftentimes call this the American Renaissance period. Part of it was because of so much fiction and poetry sprang up. We've already read a lot of the poetry a couple of weeks ago with Whitman and Dickinson. Now we're starting to see some fiction. Edgar Allan Poe, of course, is one of our most prominent fiction writers of the time. Next week, we're going to read Nathaniel Hawthorne. Nathaniel Hawthorne was also a key fiction writer of the period. Next week, we're reading The Scarlet Letter. Right, The Scarlet Letter is our reading for next week. Give yourself time to read that one, by the way. That's the longest thing we're going to read in this class. I'm actually not going to make you do a Friday response this week. I'm not going to make you do a Friday response this week because I know that The Scarlet Letter is really long. I want you guys to take plenty of time to read the whole thing for next week. So no Friday response this week. Take your time and read The Scarlet Letter, because that's our only novel we're reading in the class. But this week, we really see the emergence of the short story as a form. The Americans were who pioneered the short story. It wasn't the Brits. The Americans pioneered this form of the short story. So we owe a lot to Washington Irving for doing some early examples of that with Sleepy Hollow and Rip Van Winkle. Many other stories, too. Those are just his two famous ones. Poe, of course, too, with all these great stories we read for today, and in both fiction and horror fiction and detective fiction. So I've been talking a while. I want to turn the floor over to you guys. Anytime I teach Poe, everybody brings some sort of experience with him to the table. Edgar Allan Poe is one of those icons. Everybody has had some sort of engagement with at some point. So I just want to ask you guys, like, what do you guys know about Poe? Maybe what sort of stories have you read from him in previous English classes, or maybe for fun or something like that? So I just want to do like a round table here. What's your guys' experiences with Poe?
I like him better than Shakespeare.
Yes.
That's all I gotta say.
So what'd you read him in, Sydney? Like high school English, maybe 9th, 10th?
Yeah, I want to say it was like my 10th grade year. I took the hard English classes all through high school, so we was always real big into stuff like that. So
Right.
Poe and Shakespeare, and we read all kinds of novels and stuff.
You remember any stories you might have read from him during that time?
I know we read 2 or 3, but I honestly can't remember which ones they were. I remember the Telltale Heart. I know we touched on that one a little bit, but I don't remember what the other ones were.
The only thing I can think of with him, my daughter loves him, by the way. We have all kinds of his books. She has like collection of them, but he just seems like dark and gloomy to me. And The Raven is the only thing that comes to my mind.
Did we read any Poe in our 102 a year or so ago, Bridget? I don't remember.
Oh, I don't think so.
I might have just given you a bunch of Hawthorne in that class.
Yeah, I had Hawthorne. Mm-hmm.
Last semester I read I think it's called The Cask of
Monadillo.
Yeah, and I like that one quite a bit.
Now, I can't remember if it was English 1 or 2. Me and Tasha, we read, wasn't it the Telltale Heart? And but in high school, I can remember we read The Bells, which I think is the worst poem ever written. Oh, it's horrible. But
The bells.
I think he just like ran out of words and just started repeating the bells, hoping something would come to him, and nothing ever did. So he just kept going. But I can remember in high school reading The Raven, and there's a couple of others, but like the names ain't coming to me right now. This was the first time I'd ever read poetry by him.
Really?
Yeah, and I really liked that City in the Sea. I loved that poem.
Are you talking about Annabelle Lee?
No, it's the City in the Sea. It starts out with "Lo, death has reared himself a throne." I loved that.
In high school,
Yes, I know. I love Annabelle Lee.
What was you going to getting ready to say, Callista?
in high school, we read a lot of Poe. I know we've done a project on the Mask of the Red Death, like we done PowerPoints and stuff like that. And I remember the Telltale Heart too. And I think we read another one, but I don't remember what it is.
Yeah, I didn't realize how much Poe I've actually read like back in high school until you guys are talking about it. Like, I actually remember a lot of it now.
You probably did Telltale Heart and some of those, Kayla. Yeah, Danny, you remember back when we were in school? Like, I think we read a lot of it in like even like 7th grade and stuff. Like,
Yeah, I definitely remember Telltale Heart, which I definitely needed a refresher on it. We definitely have read it, but before I reread it, I couldn't remember what it was about. But yeah, it come back to me though after I read it. Yeah, we definitely read that and The Raven for sure. At least those two I remember.
yeah, I remember reading those way back in even like middle school.
Yeah.
So what do you guys? Go ahead.
I don't remember ever reading or ever having to read these. I don't, but I do. What I do, the very first time I ever come in contact with one of his stories was my oldest daughter had to read it in high school. And I remember it was The Telltale Heart, and she was telling me about it. I'm like, what in the world did they have these kids reading? So then I got intrigued by it, and then I had to read it. And then I was asking Lisa, I was like, Lisa, where are the pages that we're supposed to be reading? And when she said Telltale Heart, as soon as I started reading it, it came back to me. I remember, I didn't get any different reaction out of it. It's still, a little weird.
So by talking with your daughter, you remembered reading it yourself a long while back?
No, I remember that's when I first read it. I was like, I'm gonna see what these kids are having to read. Like, what is this? So I remember reading it, and that was probably, I'm gonna say 8 years ago, 8 or 9 years ago. And then when I was rereading it for this class, I was like, yes, I do remember that story. But that's the first time that I ever could say that I read anything from him.
What do you guys know about Poe the person? Everybody.
Oh, I told Tasha a story this morning.
Okay.
Isn't he like weird? Like, didn't he marry his cousin or sister or something?
Yeah, he
Or am I
married.
thinking of somebody else?
Yeah, he married a younger cousin, right? When he was in his 20s, and he married her when she was 13, right? So his cousin named Virginia, right?
She died and he got depressed, didn't he?
Yep. I think it was from tuberculosis. I might be wrong about that. I think it was from tuberculosis.
So that's kind of what The Raven is kind of about, I think.
What else? What else do you guys know?
Necrophilia.
Necrophilia.
Yeah.
I know like some of these stories might lean that way. I've never heard anybody say that Poe actually did it. Who knows?
I have read where he I don't know if he ever actually followed through with it, but he did have fantasies and wanted to. I just don't know if he ever followed through.
You
I
guys,
mean, it always seems like the most like creative, the most artistic people, like are always kind of the most like the weirdest people. I mean, not trying to like criticize or judge, but it always seems like that. The most creative geniuses are really, really different.
you guys, what do you guys know about his struggles with like
Alcohol. Yeah.
alcohol, right?
Yeah.
You guys have probably heard that at some point, I'm sure.
That one story where it's talking about his doppelganger, I think it hits a lot on that his alcohol abuse.
Right. There's some stories where even the narrator will say, I didn't have you read one, but the black cat is one. His narrator even says, I think I'm going crazy because I'm drinking too much. Right. So yeah, he did struggle a lot with alcohol and opiates, and things like that during his life.
He had like health problems that contribute to it. I think it was like diabetes or something like that. That they didn't know at the time that alcohol contributed to whatever health problem he had.
Yeah, he died at 40 years old. He was found dead in Baltimore, sitting on a bench. All right, so yeah, 40. He died at the brisk age of 40, probably for something we might know of today, like cirrhosis of the liver, something like that, which alcoholics often will get. He raises a lot of questions, right? Like as far as like fiction, writing, and drinking and things like that go. Like oftentimes they'll say that drinking will help you be creative, and it'll help your imagination. A lot of writers wrote great stuff because they were drunk. Right? There's a lot of that's a myth, I think, but Poe helped inspire that myth, like this idea of the drunk artist, right, who can only produce when drunk.
That's impressive that it worked for him at least. But I always thought alcohol like suppressed creativity.
I don't know. I've seen some pretty creative drunk people.
Yeah.
Yeah, like I have a really good friend who's actually struggling with that type of thing right now, who's went to rehab and things like that. Like, like she's told me that they even talk about that. Like there's this myth that alcohol will help sort of get your mind in a creative place to even like help you write or what have you. Poe is one of those authors famous for that. William Faulkner is another. Ernest Hemingway is another. Those are Faulkner and Hemingway are two writers you would read in American Lit 2. But it might have worked for Hemingway, but it cost him to be a major depressive, and he ended up committing suicide. So yeah, so you see what I mean here. But oftentimes, one thing I want to caution you guys about reading Poe, oftentimes people will read his fiction and they'll be like, he only wrote that because he was drunk. That's kind of a lazy way of analysis, I think. We're going to kind of steer clear of that sort of analysis. We can't really say that the author did that made that decision because he was a drunk or something like that, right? We don't know that. Often when we get to fiction writing, oftentimes a writer will create a character or a story, but we kind of have to divorce the story from the author a little bit. Even if an author comes out and says, I had the intention to make this meaning when I wrote this story. Well, that doesn't mean anything. It doesn't matter what the author intended. Right? The story could mean something to anybody. Right? So even if the author intended something one way or the other, we can't take that as that's what the story is about. Right? That's not how it works. When an author creates a text is a living, breathing entity separate from the author. This is a way of reading documents. They even had this discussion in law classes. Right? Should we view the Constitution as a text that's where we always think about like what the what the people who wrote its intentions were, or do we view it as a document that's living and breathing and amenable to the times? Like conservatives tend to view it as a dead document, or we should always go back and look at the original meaning. Liberals are tending to view it as more of a living, breathing document that can change with the times. Same thing for reading fiction. We kind of always have to divorce it from the author a little bit. So where to begin then with a detailed discussion of Poe? Why not start with the Telltale Heart, right? Since that's the one you guys are most familiar with, the Telltale Heart. This is actually my first time teaching the Telltale Heart. I normally don't teach this one because I always assume people know this one. That's why I don't often teach it. But this will be interesting. Tasha, you said a second ago that you read this with your daughter. When your daughter read it, you said that it struck you as strange and eerie. Right? You wanna talk more about that?
I mean, I this might sound bad too, but I think deep down we've all kind of felt that way at times, time to time. There's certain things about people. Sometimes you're just like, I just can't even stand to look at them.
Right.
Like, so I could feel him on that part of it. And now to say that I would kill somebody, I wouldn't do that. I would hope that I wouldn't, But you hear me, Lisa? Because we spend a lot of time together.
Yeah, I know you've wanted to kill me, but I mean,
maybe strangle you, but don't kill you. But I mean, you couldn't relate in that point of view of it.
Yeah,
I think we've all been bothered by people to the point that you're just like, oh my gosh, But it was just it's weird how he it was kind of like he fantasized like what he was going to do. Like he studied this, like this is what, how I'm going to do it. But it just had to get to the point that it bothered him so bad that when he actually, done it. And then afterwards, I thought it was very weird that he kept hearing that sound. He went crazy.
Well,
is that how you got it?
Yeah, he kind of admits right from the beginning that he's crazy, but that's what kind of, that's what I'm looking for here. That's what
He says I'm not
instead of leads to his downfall, I guess is what you could say.
Yeah. What was that, Danny?
So I thought he said he starts out by saying I'm not crazy, but when someone says that, usually they follow that up with something really crazy.
He did admit that he was nervous.
Yeah.
I'm not crazy, but right.
Yeah.
I might be a little.
I was wondering at the end if that could have been his own heartbeat that he was hearing. Or I was trying to figure out what he was really, of course he's probably schizophrenic or mentally ill in some ways, but.
We talked a lot about that when I was in high school, whenever we studied it, about it being his own heart, and he was just out of his mind.
maybe, yeah, his adrenaline, his heart was pumping because he, he had the cops in there, and
Maybe he was realizing, like, what did I do? What did I do? I took it too far. Like,
I,
they really
I
take
wrote a little bit of a research paper on it in one of the English classes that we did. I can't remember if it's one or two, but I kind of felt that the first person point of view kind of leads to the, like, you're in that place and you're reading it as that person, and that kind of makes you a little bit more nervous because you're starting to worry about yourself in a way. And I don't know if he was trying to do that to make people feel like what it's like to be insane, but I mean, it was just that kind of scary feeling.
Right. Yeah, you're right to point this out, Lisa. We have to ask ourselves, like, who's the narrator of the story? Like, can we trust what the narrator has to say? Before Poe, the conventional narrators was like a third person narrator, right? The third person narrator kind of knows everything. It's called the third person omniscient narrator, right? The narrator is almost like God in the story, telling you the story, right? The narrator knows everything about the character's motivations, what they're thinking. The narrator tells you these things. With Poe, we have this first person narrator. Like we joked a second ago, I'm not crazy, but, right? That's kind of like how the story starts. I'm not crazy, but this guy's eyes really, really messing with me over here, right? What weird, twitchy, cloudy eye that he's got, right? It's really, really rubs me the wrong way, right?
I know that look.
Right.
Because he liked the man, didn't he? I mean, he had nothing against the man. It was just his eye. He didn't like his eye.
It kind of makes you wonder, like, what kind of psychosis it was, because he did become so fixated on just that one thing.
You guys might have done that before with like a mole on somebody's face or something.
Well, I was just getting ready to say, I know that whenever, like, my husband annoys me or I annoy him, you just become fixated on like that one little thing that they're doing that's rubbing you the wrong way, and that becomes the fight.
Right.
Oh yeah, that's true.
Yeah, maybe.
Yeah,
like
when you live with someone, it's when you live with someone, you're right that sometimes just some little things start getting to you. It's stupid. Something stupid.
Yeah, like Passion said there a little bit earlier, I just can't even look at you anymore.
Yeah.
And usually it's not even about what you're arguing about. You just bring it up because it got on your nerve.
Yeah, this type of storytelling, you have to ask yourself oftentimes too, is the narrator even telling you the truth? And like, you even trust the narrator to tell you the story objectively? Because the story is coming through their experience and their consciousness. Like, so maybe reality might be a little different from what is actually being presented here. Right? So how would the cop who goes in and investigates the crime, how would that person tell the story, right? Versus how Poe's narrator told the story? It'd be radically different, right? So that's sort of the limited. That's part of the scary factor of Poe's Gothic fiction. Like, this first-person narrator, you don't know how much of it's the truth or not. Great example of this. Did any of you guys see the Joker movie that came out like a year or two ago with Joaquin Phoenix?
Yes, it was very weird.
Yeah, it's good.
You saw it, Tasha?
Yeah. I remember sitting there watching that, and it was kind of like a train wreck that you just couldn't take your eye off of, and then you had to finish it. And then it came to the end. I'm like, are you kidding me? Like, it's really sad, but there is people out there like that. But it's a very it's a dark movie, kind of, but it's intriguing though.
Yeah,
I guess I could say I like hated. It's so.
Yeah, that movie is told through the perspective of the Joker, right? You have to, and as we go through the movie, stuff that we see happening, we learn didn't really happen. Right? It's stuff it's stuff that's going on in the Joker's mind, stuff that he invents and fabricates.
Yeah, there was a lot went on there.
Yeah, half the movie you could ask, did it really happen or not? Almost like if you watch it. Danny, you said you saw it too.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, same. It's the same literary technique that's used with Poe, right? We don't know whether the narrator is always telling us the truth or not, right? Because the narrator has already lost their marbles, so to speak. Makes for intriguing fiction that way. Here's a question for any of you guys in here, like stuff like true crime documentaries about like serial killers and stuff like that. You guys like that kind of stuff? Sydney, I'm seeing you shake your head. Why do you like that kind of stuff, Sydney? Can you put your finger around it?
I don't know. Like it's crazy to think that people actually do that stuff. But then again, you can kind of relate to it in a sense. Like you've almost been to that point at one point in your life. Like,
right.
I like it, and no, well, not when I'm trying to go to sleep. I don't like that voice, but the I guess you would, what is it? The person telling the story, the narrator or whatever, the person talking. It's always got this soothing, kind of calm voice, and it just kind of sucks you. Yeah, and it kind of sucks you in, and it's got like a creepy little vibe to it almost,
like the forensic file dude,
yes.
narrator.
And you could never see anybody else doing that. But that person, it's just that voice is made for that.
I'm like that about, I don't know if any of you all have ever watched the God of War, anybody play God of War games or something, but this woman that narrates these God of War, I would listen to that woman narrate the telephone book. Like, I love that lady's voice.
I know what you're talking about. I love those games.
I don't like to play them, but I'll watch my husband play them all day long.
Yeah, like today, there's all these documentaries about these killers like Ted Bundy or John Wayne Gacy or Ed Gein, like all these different like killers over time. Every time a documentary about these type of people come out, it's a hit. People feel captivated into getting into the minds of these people, right?
That's true. And then sometimes don't you feel as morbid as their life really was? You're like, man, that show didn't, I thought it was gonna be better. Just like the Ted Bundy, what he done to those women and everything was horrific. But I was like that, as far as that show, the movie, I was kind of let down.
That's because you're watching the kid from
oh God, I think it's musical.
Zac Efron.
Yeah, you can't separate those two because in your head he's this bubbly little character, and then he's playing this guy. And me and Rachel watched it up until a certain point, and I like to died. However, it was a good movie and it was a good story, but
if you got a problem with him in that, don't watch the Lucky One.
Oh,
don't watch that. Because that is not, it's just separating. No. But one thing that in the Edgar Allan Poe, one thing that I found kind of fascinating a little bit in the Telltale Heart was how much composure he did show when he was standing there refraining and keeping still and everything for hours. Like it showed, like the side of him that was, that he could refrain himself. He could, build up that composure, but then there was the other side of it too. I was kind of fascinated about that.
Yeah. Still for hours, right? He only loses his marbles when he sees that eye twitch around.
Yeah.
That's when he finally says enough. I'm gonna like choke this guy to death under the bed. Right. It's very vague about how he actually kills him.
That's what I was going to say. Like, how did he actually? Yeah, you know.
It seems like he's smothered in the death underneath the bed. That's that with
Yeah.
like he sits the bed on top of him or something and smothers him to death. That's what I took away from reading it again.
Yeah, I was wondering because it said that he pulled him off the bed and put him under it, and then checked him to see if his heart was still beating.
Yeah, I don't know if it was like a pillow over his face or something like that.
Because he talked about it not being a dirty. He kept it clean. There was no evidence, I guess you'd say.
So like that was the only reason why he killed the dude.
Right, that twitchy eye, right?
Because of the
Yeah, what about the eye unsettled this guy, do you think? Like why did this eye upset him so much? We could go into psychological reasons or spiritual reasons, right? What do you guys, why was this eye so upsetting to the narrator?
I
Maybe
pictured it as like okay, I'm sorry.
go ahead.
I was just kind of pictured it as like a cataract eye, how you know, like in some movies, how like a glossed over like look, maybe. And then I don't know, but
That's
yeah,
the way I
Or
see
was
it.
he blind?
Yeah.
Was the eye like the blind film?
Yeah. Yeah, he was blind because he kept shining the light on the eye, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it was like this glassy blind eye, right?
It is pretty creepy looking. I mean, you can't really deny that. I mean, it's not gonna make me want to kill somebody, but it would kind of freak you out a little bit, maybe make you uncomfortable slightly.
But like we were talking about, like if you were sitting there talking to him, you would notice it. It would be kind of
Yeah.
You know, the focal point.
Well, yeah, you try not to stare, but be staring at.
Right.
Yeah.
But at the same time, maybe he didn't know where that guy was actually looking, because I've had that issue myself. Like, you don't know what eye to look at, number one, and then you don't know which one's actually looking at you.
Yeah,
I
definitely.
like that with lazy eyes. Like you talk to somebody who's got a lazy eye,
Mm-hmm.
and like you don't know if they're talking to you, because like if they're 20 feet away and they're hollering at you, like are they talking to me or like are they talking to the person beside me? Like that's always bothered me.
Right. So I don't know how much psychology and stuff you guys have had. You could probably say this guy's something like obsessive compulsive or something like that, right? That might be what that might put in like modern psychological diagnoses on like 19th century characters. That's almost an exercise in futility, right? But he does seem like very obsessive compulsive or something. What about eyes in the soul and all that though? What you guys want to explain the significance of eyes in the soul?
Ooh, I hadn't thought about that, because they say it's the windows to your soul.
Right.
And if that eye's clouded, he can't see what his soul actually looks like.
Oh.
Right.
Because he did
Well,
keep
you're
talking
one of
about it. Go ahead.
Earlier when I was rereading this, I was at work and some guy came in and I guess he had like a glass eye, and I was sitting there thinking like the whole time I was just like trying not to stare at him. I was just thinking about this story and I was like, oh my God.
Talk about perfect timing.
Yeah, I know. Like I literally had just got done reading it and I'm training a girl in there right now. And I was like, I literally just read this story about a guy that killed another guy over his eye. And I was like, and now I'm freaked out.
Was you going to say something, Tasha, about eyes in the soul and all that?
I forgot.
I forgot what she's going to say.
Oh, with it, you know, where Lisa was talking about, you know, they do say that maybe he thought that he had a bad soul. Because he couldn't, it was clouded over.
Maybe he thought the guy couldn't see through his.
I think that's where it was going, Bridget. Like, even though he knows he can't see, like for some reason or another, he feels creeped out about this eye always looking at him, right? Like it's piercing into his soul or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So he feels kind of exposed and vulnerable, right? When this eye is always looking at him. Even though he knows he can't see anything, he feels vulnerable somehow because that eye is always like gazing at him.
Gazing,
Maybe he
right.
thought it was kind of like a third sight situation, like that guy couldn't see what we see, but he could see beyond, and he could see what was going on in his soul.
Right? Yeah, I think you're spot on there, right?
Yeah, I like that. I didn't think of that.
Me either.
So maybe he can see the dark underbelly of a soul, right? More than the average person could. Yeah, this is a great story to talk about with literature and disability, right? Because we oftentimes with like disabled people, we have these like conceptions of them and stuff. You know, this story is really good at showing maybe about the blind and conceptions we have about them and whatnot.
You know, it was along about that time that if you were blind or just say even like what we know to be autistic and stuff like that today, they were just institutionalized and just labeled as like mentally handicapped or whatever, and they didn't understand what was going on like we were starting to understand things now.
It wasn't too long ago, right?
And they probably mistook them as witches, and you know, as far as going way back, that awful experiments to them and stuff.
Yeah, fun facts for all the ladies in here. The medical profession of gynecology actually started because of a lot of this stuff that we're talking about. You know, it was the profession was invented to like understand like women's hysterics and things like that, right? So that's when they started probing down into like I use the word probing here, right? You know, to try to trace like, you know, why women do things they do, right? Oftentimes it was because they said that they were crazy or something. So like the profession of gynecology actually started for these reasons. Like something like postpartum depression, right? You know, early gynecology. That's why the profession of gynecology started. They were trying to explain those types of things.
That's good to know.
Yeah. As a future medical practitioner yourself.
Right. That's good to go. Interesting. I can see that though, because that's a real thing, and it does a lot of times. You know, postpartum depression make women crazy, and even not only that, women's body and their personalities and to say their mood changes with their monthly menstrual cycles. I mean, you know what I'm saying?
Right. Yeah. So yeah, the profession started in an attempt to try to explain these things.
To try to explain it. That's good.
Yeah, you of course then like for instance, like with childbirth and whatnot, that type of thing used to be done mostly by midwives. Men started doing it after a while because men were the gynecologists, right? So there was all kinds of crazy stuff in the 19th century about that. Like they were afraid to put a woman under because they were afraid that they put a woman under, the male doctor would see the woman's genitalia and then wouldn't be able to control his urges and things like that. all kinds of crazy stuff in the 19th century about gynecology. I don't know how we got on this subject, but yeah, they had so anesthesia. That's how like when early anesthesia, they were afraid to give it to women for that reason.
You know, and as far as like the postpartum depression stuff, we've really made strides even from when I had my daughter. She's 18 now, and I couldn't remember I can't remember exactly what it was, but she was sick. And I had somebody tell me, you need to get control of yourself. You're hysterical. And I'm like, my kid's sick.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that idea of calling a woman hysterical goes back to the 1800s, right?
Wasn't in Hawthorne's The Yellow Wallpaper? Didn't she just have a baby and went into that like depression and
That story,
and locked herself in that room? And just the one thing that paranoid her was the wallpaper or the smell of it, like drove her crazy.
Right. Yeah, the Yellow Wallpaper story, right?
I've read that.
That's
one.
what that was about.
Cool.
Did you read that one of Concord, Danny? Yellow Wallpaper?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we got on a diversion here, but this is an interesting subject. It's a subject I happen to know a lot about because that's what I did my doctorate project on. It's like a medical profession in the 1800s and how that involves literature. Right? So that's how we got on this diversion, I suppose. Let's segue over to another one of these stories. We read several for today. Telltale Heart, The Mask of the Red Death, William Wilson about the doppelgangers. Which one do you guys want to talk about next?
I liked The Mask of the Red Death. I don't know if anybody else did, but I don't know if anybody else paid attention, but I swear it was like last year reading some of that. I even underlined something because I was like, oh my God, that was last year. Oh, it was toward the close of the 5th or 6th month of his seclusion. I was like, oh my God, that was 2020.
Yeah, this is my first time teaching it since the pandemic, right? But you're right. It's hard to read it now without thinking about that.
For some reason, okay.
No, you go ahead, Danny.
It's dumb, but for some reason, whenever I was reading that one, what came to mind was Magic Johnson, because he got AIDS, but I mean he caught it back in the the late 80s. Then it was a whole lot. It seems like we got treatment kind of down with it today, but like it just seemed like he had he's a rich man. He had the cure for AIDS back then.
Right. So some of you guys who might be a little older in the chorus, right, might remember like back in the 80s, right? The HIV AIDS scare and like how scary the fear of the unknown almost with that, right?
That was like when I was coming up like almost double digits, I guess is what you call it. And then into my teen years, and I can remember before they had actually named it, like just the panic of what it was, and everybody and these people were getting sick with it and nobody knew what it was, and it was just this panic that was going on. And I can remember when what was his name, the little boy, Ryan, was it Ryan White? But he got it through a blood transfusion, and I can remember watching his story, and like they labeled him as certain things, and he had got it through blood. And but I can remember when Magic Johnson was diagnosed too, and it was just for what was that, like a period of 10 to 12 years, that was almost a daily thing that you heard about, and then it was gone, and you don't talk about it a whole lot anymore.
Yeah, people were dying. I mean, left and right from it, young people and everything. And Magic Johnson, it's like, he still seems to be pretty healthy today.
Yeah, he looks healthy.
Yeah.
I remember watching that. Do you all remember? I know Lisa probably does. On the Channel 1 news that you would watch in the morning. You would have to watch in homeroom in junior high and stuff. That's where I remember seeing that. And it was just such a shock, and you automatically thought he was going to die, like he was going to die within the next week. We just didn't know a lot about it, but we knew that it was deadly.
Yeah.
And that you didn't want it, nobody wanted it. But I'm like you, like I often, not really often, but just like all of a sudden you'll think, like, I wonder how he is doing. That's over 20 years ago now, and he looks good and he looks healthy, but I'm with you, Danny. He's got a lot of money to have the best medicines and stuff out there. But we've came a long way.
Yeah, of course, you guys probably. I was going to say, you guys probably know in the 80s when all that happened, the American government was completely quiet about it. Like they wouldn't even acknowledge that it was happening.
Yeah.
That's kind of what I was thinking about. It was a death sentence. When you were diagnosed then, it was a death sentence. It was just a matter of time. When were you going to die? And I'm like Danny as well. I think that his money, because what was it? 10 years or Lord, it's been way longer than 10 years. I can remember him saying that he was cured of it. And it just,
I kind of believe it.
Yeah. And if you've got enough money to pay for it, you can do these treatments.
Have you all ever thought that maybe, because it coming out around that same time, he was a big basketball star, and you ever wonder if it was maybe a hoax to get people like really cautious about this? Like you take one of the biggest basketball superstars of basketball, of course you would think he's going to overcome it because, he has the money and stuff, but like, he looks very healthy. I've just wondered about that. I've just thought about, like, was that like kind of a scare tactic to, to scare people to be cautious about getting it?
I'm sure he underwent like cutting edge, like new, like not even approved, like
research.
Trials and research and stuff, like experimental stuff. I'm sure. But, yeah.
I'm sure with that little boy getting it too, through that blood transfusion and everything, that probably really, changed the way that our blood is tested and screened and everything before it is given out.
Yeah, I'm glad we're talking about this because whenever we talk about contagions and pandemics, whether it's the HIV, even the coronavirus, oftentimes the act of getting sick, oftentimes it's associated with morality in a way, right? Because especially with HIV, right? You didn't get HIV unless you were some type of moral degenerate.
Either gay or on drugs. Those are the two kind of stereo.
People didn't think
those are stigmas.
Yeah, like Bridget said, it's a stigma.
Yeah, right.
That is true.
Yeah, like we know now what causes it, right? Just sexual contact, someone who has it, whether it's homosexual or heterosexual contact, right? But back then,
needles.
Back then they viewed it as a particular thing for especially the gay community.
Mm-hmm.
Even with coronavirus, right? Some like that this comes up with that too, because a lot of people thought that God would shield them from it, right? If they were, especially if you're Christian, right? God would shield them from the contagion, right? Like, especially people that wouldn't wear their masks and stuff, right?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, God will protect me from it, right? But that was a lot of the discourse that was happening. I bring this up because this is what's happening in the story, right? Prince Prospero seems sort of smug about it. He's like, oh, this can't happen to us, right? It can't, right? We built this whole wall, right? We're protecting ourselves from it. No way it can happen to us. Right? We're better than that. Did you want to say something, Danny?
Oh yeah, no, I was just going to add on what you said. You know, with the Chinese people, I know there's a lot of stereotype or stigmas with the Chinese. But yeah, I'm sure there's a lot of people dead from the coronavirus that said it wasn't ever gonna get them. You know.
I think too, a lot of people use that kind of as a crutch. Now I'm not saying, the good Lord can't shield and protect you, because I totally believe he can. But I think a lot of it had more to do with they're not going to tell me what I have to do.
Yeah.
I'm going to prove it. And I'm sure a lot of people, lost their lives, because of that. Pride, I guess you'd say. They're not going to take that away from me.
It was pride, and they made it political, because I know even my mom and dad, when Trump was still in office, and they were not Trump supporters, but when he was still in office and he was trying to tell them to wear masks, my dad literally said, he ain't gonna make me do nothing, that and it's fake and stuff like that. Well, Biden takes office, and all of a sudden masks everywhere. How dare you not go anywhere without a mask? Don't you know what I mean? And it's just, people just want to politicize everything. And as much as I love them, they wrote that
smart.
way too. Huh?
So you got to be smart.
Yeah.
Sometimes you just.
There's a lot of stubbornness. I think, a lot of it was just not going to tell me what to do. Kind of, I don't know, kind of Thoreau-ish even way. It's you know what I mean? Like, just thinking that it's there's just a lot of people will exercise their freedom just because they can, even if it's bad for, even if it's not the right decision too, does that make sense?
Yeah,
it brings a point.
Yeah. That reminds me of a story. It was back, I'm gonna say 5-6 years ago. It's when this trend was going around on social media of people just like walk past somebody and just bust them in the face as they were walking past. And this couple was walking through a park, and this man walked by, and I mean, he hit this woman hard in the face. Well, her husband just threw down and whooped him. And I had shared something on that, shared that video, and I said, that's what my husband would do to protect me. And there was a guy that was a preacher. I assume he still does, but he commented and told me that I was wrong, that because Christians, God ain't going to allow Christians to be hurt, and retaliation was wrong. And I'm like, but don't the Bible say that it rains on the just and the unjust? Bad things are going to happen, and you're not absolved because of your faith or gender or anything like that. But I mean, it's just people, they get this mindset of like, I'm above it. And then when it happens, it's a shock, and that's when they get knocked down and their faith is weak. And I think that's what causes a lot of people to lose their faith.
And that's what happens in this story in a nutshell, right? It's this rich prince, right? Thinks that he's invincible to it. Like, if you build a wall, separate yourself from these people who have this contagion, right? Yeah, we won't get it. We're just going to have a good time partying all the time, right? Yeah,
until he was saying we are going to build a wall generations before Trump said it.
Yeah, it started with Prince Prospero here, right? But suddenly this guy shows up to the party, right? Yeah, everybody's having a ball. He describes the people at the ball like they're in this like masquerade, right? It's almost dreamy, right? How like they dance around, like It's almost like this dream state that everybody's in at the party. But then, so he also spends a lot of time talking about the curtains. I want to ask you guys about that in a second. But suddenly this guy shows up, with this plague mask on, and with the funeral clothes on. He just breaks up the party, right? And of course, he's a symbolic. I mean, he's the plague, right? He represents the plague, right? He kills Prospero, right? That's it's definitely, the story is very heavy-handed in its message here, right? That it doesn't matter if you're rich or poor or whatever, how many walls you erect, right? You can still be vulnerable to this stuff. It's very unsettling, right? And no matter how rich or how many precautions you put up, even, right, you can still get it. Right?
Eventually, something's going to get you anyways. Or you're not above every person goes. I mean, we're all equal as far as that goes.
Death's the great equalizer, right? And rich, poor, we're all the same in the end.
Mm-hmm.
Bible says that death has no respect to persons. It don't matter what your age, your gender, your faith. It's once appointed unto men to die, and after this, the judgment.
Yeah, like Jonathan Edwards says, right? We could slip on ice anytime, right? Break our necks, and God was ready to throw us in the fire, right? Yeah, it's very. The contagion they struggled with then was cholera. I don't know if you guys know what cholera. Any of you guys know what cholera is? You know what it is, Bridget? I remember.
Is that the one from drinking from the water, or where they got it from that water source?
Yeah, it's the bacterial infection.
They got it a lot of times from where like outhouses drained into the streams, didn't they?
Yeah, it was caused by this bacteria. I forget the name of the exact bacteria, but it was a bacterial infection, and it was often spread with unclean sanitary conditions. Like it got into the water because the water oftentimes wasn't clean in these cities and such. But it pretty much was this awful. It's an awful way to die, getting cholera. It pretty much causes you to shit yourself to death. Right? That's pretty within a span of like a day or two. Right? You lose so much water that you're done. And it only takes a day or two. It's an awful thing. And at the end, it's such an epidemic in the 1800s. Like, eventually they discovered what caused it in the 1870s. Right? It was caused by this bacteria. Like, and then the antibiotics and stuff helped get rid of that disease from ever coming back. You still see it in third world countries today. It's still a thing in third world countries that don't have readily available access to antibiotics.
Is that also called the Black Plague?
No, the Black Plague is something different. That's a different type of bacteria. Of course, that's what spread in Europe in the medieval ages and wiped out.
Was that from rats? Something in the streets?
It wasn't exactly because of rats. Rats didn't help the matter any. Like, it was the fleas on the rats that caused it. Yeah. And the rats were the conduits of the fleas. Like when the fleas bit people, that's what caused it.
Yeah.
Again, that was also a moral issue, right? Back even in the 1300s, right? And if you got the Black Plague, it was seen as a sign of your moral indecency or whatever. That disease also killed people within the span of days if you contracted it. course, I don't know how much medieval history you guys have had, but it wiped out a quarter of the population in Europe in the medieval era. Again, that's another disease that doesn't exist much except in third world countries today, because you can get rid of it with an antibiotic if you contract it. Now, cholera is what they dealt with then. That was a very bad way to go, just to say the least. Most people don't even know what it is now, because it's been eradicated with antibiotics for the most part. Syphilis was another disease then, right? It was a bacterial disease. And if it was left untreated, it would cause physical deformities and mental problems and all kinds of things. I mean, if you get it today, you can take care of it in a couple of weeks. An antibiotic. Just again, more fun medical history for you guys, since that's my thing.
And syphilis would make you go insane too, wouldn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Thought so.
Yep, it sure would. They say that's what caused King George to go insane. The King George of Britain during the American Revolution. He later lost his marbles after the American Revolution was over. They say that's what caused him to. There's also a rumor that's what caused Hitler to lose his marbles, right? It was syphilis.
I can see it, but I don't know how much I believe of that. I think he was just evil.
Right.
Syphilis was the root of the Holocaust.
That some historians say that, yeah. Definitely part of it. It rots your brain, quite literally. So, other stories we can talk about in here. We haven't even covered the Raven or Annabelle Lee or anything. I'd be remiss not to mention the Purloined Letter. The Purloined Letter is an early detective story, right? We owe it Poe and Arthur Conan Doyle over in England, right? Those were the two innovators of the detective story in 19th century fiction, which you guys know Doyle's more famous for it now than Poe because of the Sherlock Holmes stories. Right? Any of you guys Sherlock Holmes fans in here? Like the show or anything?
I can remember I think it was 10th grade, we read the Hounds of the Baskervilles, or however you pronounce that. I really liked that story. But as far as that, I've never read anything else. I mean, that was a required reading, is the only reason I read it, but I did enjoy it.
I was wondering that actually while I was reading this, because the way that he described the detective, with the pipe in his mouth, I'd wonder if this was what started, detectives like that, Sherlock Holmes and I think Dick Tracy. I think that was another one.
Yeah. After this type of character came about around this time, right? Whether you want to attribute it to Poe or Doyle or both, right? Both of them were the pioneers of this type of thing. Just think about it, even in movies, right? It inspired a whole movie genre, film noir, right? With the detective, like the 40s movies with the detectives, like in the big cities and stuff. But the Purloined Letter is a pretty interesting, like nothing really happens in the story. Like in the middle of it, the detective explains how he solved the crime, just like that, right? This government official steals this letter out of this other person's office, right? Uses it to blackmail her. Right. The whole point of the story is how did he get where's the letter being hid, right? The police search for the letter and they can't find it. Where's the letter even at? Right. So the whole story is about this guy's logical deductions about like how he figures out where the letter was. Of course, where was the letter? hidden in plain sight, right? You know, he crumpled it up to make it look like it was just trash, and hid it directly in plain sight, and nobody even noticed it. People were too busy looking under the floorboards and under bricks and everything else, right? The letter was just crumpled up on the table for everybody to see. Right? So, yeah, funny solution to the problem here. Right? What'd you guys make of that story? Of this story? Find it enjoyable? It's definitely different than Poe's other stuff.
I didn't get to read it all. I was trying to read it while I was waiting on my daughter down the road, but I didn't get to finish it. But now I was enjoying it. I thought it was kind of almost humorous in a way, because he was asking about, well, couldn't it have been like rolled up in, I think it was like a finial of a chair or something like that? And he's like, no, we have methods. And we know when there's a false bottom. You can't fool us. And I thought it was kind of funny.
Right. Of course, he's going to hide it in the weird drawer, right? Of course he would, right? It sort of subverts your expectations, right? Like, where would you hide something? Right.
It was kind of a bait and switch type thing. He got him talking about like where they didn't find it, so they didn't look where it actually was.
That one kind of confused me a little bit. I struggled to keep up with it.
Yeah, me too.
Why so, guys?
Like I never understood like why he took it. Like, I know that he took it because he thought it was justified. Like, he thought that he had the right to do so, but I never understood why.
Why the official stole the letter?
Yeah.
He used it for blackmail. Right? He was using it to control there was something incriminating in the letter, and he was using it to blackmail the other person, right, into doing what he wanted. So that was why the letter was valuable, was because he was using it as leverage for blackmail.
Yeah, politician did, and the politician was on there something that wasn't, she didn't want the public to see or something like that. And
yeah, she actually saw the guy steal the letter right in front of her face, but she couldn't really say anything without incriminating herself. And so, she saw him steal it right in her sight. But said if she brought attention, she would incriminate herself.
I think where I might have got lost is did whenever he offered money, I think, to find it, did he already have it whenever the money was offered?
Yep.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, the guy, right after the first time he tells him about it, he just figures it out just like that. Of course, it's hidden in plain sight. So, yeah, he's just messing with him at this point.
Right.
He's got the letter, right? Tell me, you say you'll give me $20,000 or whatever. Okay, well, here it is. Yeah, that's another humorous moment, right? Lisa's right to point out that there's some comedy in the story. Yeah, he just sees it. It's crumpled up. So the way that he gets it back, he like pays somebody to like shoot a gun outside the window. And then the guy looks out his window. He just does a bait and switch and switches out a fake for the real one. He knew that if he would have taken the real one, that it would have been noticed without putting the fake back, that it would have been noticed. He probably wouldn't have gotten out of there with it. So he makes a fake and switches them out. Pretty cool little story. I've always found it interesting in many ways.
I liked it too because before I went into it, I said, I started thinking, I was like, I wonder if Poe ever, written any other genres besides horror, because that's the main ones are usually the horror stories. So, and then there was, so yeah, that was interesting.
He was a very prolific author. To have done everything that he did by the time he turned 40, right? It's an amazing accomplishment in everything that he did do, while struggling with money and poverty and his addictions and all of that, in all that time. This is the time period, something I should mention. This is the time period where we finally start to see authors making a living based off of being an author, right? Before, all the people we've read up to now, that's not how they made their living. That was just something they did on their own time. So Ben Franklin, right? He didn't make his living being an author. He made it having a printing shop. Emerson didn't make a living being an author, right? He made it by being like a lecturer on things on the public lecture circuit. Right? Suddenly, with people like Poe, we're finally starting to see this is the first time in history people were making a living just being authors.
Do you think that a lot of the quality might have decreased whenever this started happening? Because I'm thinking about I listen to a lot of music, and I know when bands start to kind of sell out, Do you ever see that in authors?
Oh yeah, I mean, just think about like somebody like Stephen King now, right? Yes. Stephen King back in his heyday, like in the 70s and 80s, right? That was the premier stuff that he wrote, like The Shining and It and things like that.
Oh yeah. Right.
Now it feels like he comes out with a book every 3 months. Right?
Kind of feel like he's just trying to fulfill a quota now, and he's not doing it for the passion.
Yeah. Sell out. Yeah.
Like I was a huge Stephen King fan back in the day, and like my favorite book of his was Bag of Bones, and to me it was just after that it was kind of like he really didn't care anymore, and he wasn't putting out the quality stuff that he used to, and I miss that because he could write a story now.
Yeah, he has a very interesting essay called On Writing. It talks about his writing process and how he has to do so many words a day, whether he wants to or not. All right, it's an interesting essay if you guys are interested in the process of creativity and writing things.
I read that he was really inspired by Poe.
Oh yeah, Poe and Lovecraft and all kinds of these horror writers, right? King was.
Yeah, my daughter, that's what she asked for Christmas, or birthday and Christmas. I think she got like 6 or 7 Stephen King books, but it was like all the old stuff. It was, I don't think it was The Shining, but it was The Stand and The Green Mile and just old stuff like that. And I told her, I said, that was when like he was doing it because it was a passion. And it's just, I don't know, it's just now it's just the same thing over and over and over again. And I just wonder if he has so many book deal and he's just turning them out to get it over with.
And then you have writers like George Martin, R.R. Martin, right? Does it? Any of you guys like the Game of Thrones stuff in here?
I've never watched Game of Thrones.
I'm not a big fan of Game of Thrones myself, but like that show took over the world there for a little while, right? It was the most popular thing on TV. And when that show started, he had already written like 5 books.
Yeah.
And to date, he's still only written 5 books, right? Because he couldn't keep up with he wanted to eventually control the story to where it ended on his terms. He thought he could write the 2 books in the time it took the show. But he just lost his passion for it somewhere along the way. So the show ended up surpassing the books as far as stuff that happened. And then the show writers really botched it up. So
Yeah,
I guess
let's
that's
be
good for
honest,
him.
the movie or the show is never as good as the book. Ever.
It's good he didn't force himself, I guess. Yeah, I know. I'm sure a lot of writers and stuff would kind of force it, and it still wouldn't be that good. Kind of tarnish your legacy a little bit.
Now all the fans are eagerly anticipating his next book, right? Since the show ended crappily, right? They're ready for his ending, if he ever gets around to it. I feel for the guy, right? Why should he be forced to write just for? He's already filthy rich. What's he care anymore, right? Just to make more money.
I mean, you got more to lose, really, than more to gain once you get that rich. I mean, your reputation, yeah, your legacy, and I mean, all these fans hating at you even more. I'm sure he's still receiving death threats for not even writing anything.
Yeah. And that's a pretty crazy fan base.
Yeah.
Yeah, Poe is one of our first people to make a living based off his writing. It wasn't just because of his selling books. He was very popular in his day, but he also made a living like being the editor of like literary magazines that were coming out around this time. This was when magazines really took off as a thing that people were actually reading. Like these magazines would come out with these short stories. Oftentimes the authors would write novels, and different installments would come out every month. So you get like a little bit of the novel every month for like a year, like 3 or 4 chapters. And finally, at the end of those 12 months, they would publish the book as a whole. So people often read novels like they were serials, like watching TV is now. I mean, like every month you'd get a little bit more. Yeah, this was the time period all that stuff started. Now our author next week, Hawthorne, he did not make a living writing. Like he wrote a lot, but he didn't sell a lot of books during his life. He only became popular after he was dead, right? But Poe was pretty popular when he was alive. Yeah, for a long time after Poe's death, he wasn't widely read. Like he kind of fell out of favor with like English professors and stuff for up until like the 50s, 60s when he made a comeback. It's almost like for 100 years or so after his death, a lot of people didn't really read much. He made a big comeback later in 100 years after his death, where he started to become widely read again. People thought it wasn't serious literature. People thought it was sensational and just trying to get a scare or a rise out of you, right? It's not true literature like something like Shakespeare is, right? That's why he fell out of favor for a long time. Well, Sydney made the comment earlier, she likes Poe better than Shakespeare, right? So screw those guys, right?
I don't know. Shakespeare's just weird.
I love some Shakespeare too. You just have to have the right teacher for Shakespeare. That's what I always say. To fully appreciate it.
Well, my teacher hated Shakespeare too, so he didn't really teach it as well as he should have.
It didn't inspire enthusiasm in the subject, right?
Yep.
That's like all the stuff we've read in here, right? Mary Rowland's captivity narrative is not really that exciting, right? But we still had a good time talking about it.
Yeah, we read stuff like Lord of the Flies. That was probably the best month that I've ever had in school whatsoever. I made a timeline out of cupcakes for that project of everything symbolic that happened throughout that book. I even had a pretzel with a little pig. Yeah. It's pretty great.
That's one of the, you always have to ask, what has your teacher actually read or what hasn't your teacher read? I've actually never read that one.
Really?
Yeah, never read it.
I highly recommend it. It's like male dominance.
Every
Really good.
every English professor or teacher has that shame list of the stuff that they should have read but never read. That one's on my shame list.
Yeah, I loved that book.
All right, guys.
What's it
So
called, Sydney?
Lord of the Flies.
by William Golding.
I'm gonna make a note.
I've
It
never
was
watched Star
honestly
Wars.
so great.
Never watched Star Wars, Danny?
No, shamefully not.
Oh my
haven't
Lord,
either.
that was like a gunshot to my heart.
No, Danny, I'm with you. I could not tell you. No, I do not like these movies.
Lord.
So we're still friends. But
Yes, I love you still, but God.
no, they play it here all the time because my husband loves them. The Rocky movies.
Mm.
Oh, I hate the
love
Rocky
them.
movies.
Yeah, I
My
love them.
oldest one and my husband loves them. I despise them.
Same.
Now, who wrote that? Lord of the Flies. Who wrote it?
William Golding.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's also a movie. I've seen
Really?
I've seen the movie, but I haven't watched the book or read the book.
Yeah, we made that book a big deal when I was in high school. That was the highlight of the year.
And guys, if y'all feel better about Poe now after discussing it, feel more of an appreciation.
I like them. Yeah.
Yeah, I always did like Poe, but I kind of like that morbid stuff.
Me too. I don't know why I like the death, and I like horror movies and heavy metal, so I guess that kind of goes hand in hand
Yeah.
with it. So.
I mean, I'm a little Jesus girl, so, but I still love me some Metallica. So
Yeah. Oh yeah.
That's good. That's good.
no, my daughter, when I was pregnant with her, it was Inner Sandman mostly. Now it's just any Metallica. But whenever you'd play Inner Sandman, you could just watch her roll in my stomach, and she still loves Metallica so much. I did something right.
So next week, just a reminder, the Scarlet Letter. Right? It's a bit of a long one. It's a great book and a great novel. It's a bit of a long one. Read a little bit every day. Don't try to binge it on Saturday night or Sunday night or whatever. Read a little bit of it every day. You'll appreciate it more. Don't try to binge it.
Is that in the book, or is that something we need to find online?
Yeah, the whole novel's in her textbook. Right?
Okay.
So, read a little bit of it at a time, and you'll appreciate it more. So that is, like I said, I'm no Friday reading this week because I'm giving you time to read the Scarlet Letter. Okay? So take your time, read a little bit every day. All right.
I found it on 425.
Yes.
425 is where it starts.
Yeah.
All right.
I had to Google who wrote it.
Yeah, Nathaniel Hawthorne.
I can remember this being assigned in high school, but I think that was one of the assignments that I didn't do because I wasn't a good high school student.
And the famous story of Hester, right, getting the Scarlet Letter for cheating.
See, at least it comes back to bite you. You still had to do it.
Yes, I know. I was just thinking.
I've heard of this one, but I don't
maybe
think
I
I've
should have read
it
it to begin with.
Is this a movie? Is this a movie?
Oh yeah, they made movies of it. Yeah.
Oh Lord, I tried to watch, and I was in high school. The one with Demi Moore in it.
Yeah.
Oh, I had some embarrassment on that thing.
I won't watch the movie until after I read the book.
Yes.
That's right, Danny. That's right.
Book's always better.
Yeah.
Not always. I'll even say that. Not always, but most of the time.
Most of the time, yeah.
All right, guys. So great discussion. like I said, I'll try to get that paper topic up for you soon. I'll send you an email when I do. So until next time, then, see you guys next Tuesday.
See ya.
Bye, have a good one.
Yeah.